Okay, so welcome everybody. Just a brief introduction to the Association of Engaged Buddhists. It's a non-profit organisation formed by a group of lay Buddhist practitioners and supported by an ordained Sangha as our spiritual director, Bhante Tejadamo. We welcome all who think that they might benefit from learning and practicing meditation, who wish to find a different way of looking at life, or who simply are seeking for a supportive community with which to practice the Dharma together. We organise regular Dharma talks, meditation practice and meditation retreats. We have a beautiful retreat centre at the Southern Highlands of New South Wales called Vejsala, where we hold our retreats. Our next formal retreat has actually been postponed to, it's the 20th now, isn't it, Meredith? And Meredith is going to share the screen and to show you it's with Kine and Tan. It's a 3-night student-centered meditation retreat, allowing practitioners to settle into stillness and quiet and have the chance to discuss your practice privately with the teacher. So if you're interested, please do register early. If you are looking for a community to practice and learn, we wish to be able to support you mentally and spiritually in a safe, caring, and supportive environment. If you haven't, please consider joining us as a member and subscribe to our newsletter. As we are run solely based on donation, any generous support will be very much appreciated. All teachers are offering their teaching free of charge. So if you wish to offer dana to the teacher, you may contact us directly or make a donation through the website. Just indicate that it's dana for the teacher. For more information about the retreat or how to support us, please check on our website and the Facebook page, and Meredith will post the information in the chat. I thought I'd gone. I thought I'd disappeared, but I'm here. Good. So here we have Jonathan, Dr. Jonathan Page, who's here to be our speaker tonight. So I'm very happy to welcome you, Jonathan. Dr. Jonathan has been a medical oncologist for 36 years and enjoys endurance cycling. He began his meditation practice in 1984, but to his chagrin was largely an erratic practitioner until 2004, generally employing meditation as a last resort to manage innumerable life crises with variable impact. He was persuaded to be more diligent in his meditation with the onset of a more difficult to shift despondency, particularly burnout mixed with depression. These were poorly managed by the orthodox medical establishment. Thankfully, over time, this crisis yielded to regular meditation and the comfort of the 3 jewels. So, welcome, Jonathan. And if you're ready, I will pass to you. And if everyone could mute themselves apart from Jonathan, of course, please.
So do you want to have a meditation at the start or the finish, or what's your best preference? So let's have a meditation for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And then after that, we'll move into the talk and discuss.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. Fantastic.
All right, everybody. So let's just have a quiet, self-guided meditation. I think if you're inclined to focus on compassion for yourself, for the Sangha, for someone in your life, particularly someone in your life who might allow compassion to flourish. That's what would be a good state to have this evening. And it would set you up for the talk as well, which is focusing on various aspects of compassion in the world. So see if you can just arouse compassion in your own heart. All right, everybody. So thank you for the invitation. And I'm going to talk about a topic which is close to my heart, compassion through crises. And crises, of course, can refer to personal crises, which I think we all have from time to time, and compassion is generally part of the solution. And the subtitle being The Path to a Sustainable Future for Humanity. So that's referring to, in particular, the climate crisis. We could include the pandemic. Many would say that the pandemic is related to the climate crisis. And I'm just going to really talk about where Buddhism fits with the climate crisis, because we know that many Buddhists, and in particular engaged Buddhists, are out in the streets, and they're engaged in this election campaign and around the world, and have a good understanding of the climate crisis. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Buddhist response and what's happening with climate at the moment, and what we can do through Buddhism. So this is a powerful image that I don't think many people consider, that the earth, we can consider Gaia, the word reflecting life on earth, is so precious that we should be caring for it as we would a child. So I'll talk a bit about the uniquely beneficent position of Buddhism, the current magnitude of the climate crisis, and I'm not sure some of you may be aware of progress there. There are a couple of numbers that were very unsettling. About 6 weeks ago, the number 36.3 came through, and then about a week ago, the number 420 came through. I don't know if anybody knows what they refer to. I'm going to leave time at the end for discussion, but if you have a question that needs answering or a point of clarification, please interrupt. The 420 refers to the concentration of carbon dioxide. So you're probably aware that it's been going up. You're probably aware of the organisation called 350.org, 350 being the level that we had, the concentration way back last century. And ever since it's been rising, and it reached 420 officially. That's the average around the whole world. It would vary from place to place. And of greater concern really is this number 36.3, because that refers to the total amount of CO2 we're producing. And that's the highest it's ever been. That refers to the billions of tons. That's the number of billions of tons per year. So that was the amount officially measured for last year, 2021, part of which was in the COVID pandemic, but it went up. Whereas it should have been going down at least by 7% per year for the last couple of years, and it's not. And because I'll talk about this a bit later, because the climate change itself, is accelerating, and therefore, unless we do something today, it's going to be harder to do it tomorrow, and then even harder the next day. So if there's something that takes us 12 hours to do because we want to sleep and have family time, if we don't do it today and then tomorrow, we've got to squeeze that 12 hours into 11 and 10. There's a point where just whatever it was we wanted to do will never be done. And then I'll just show a few graphs, and then the interpretation of those graphs, which is quite grim, although you wouldn't think so by reading the media or being out in the street, looking at the traffic, as I do. I'd see the traffic, which is as bad as it's ever been in Sydney. I think if there was any hope, I'll say this prematurely, any hope, then it might have been that after COVID, then people would just have stopped their cars, stop driving, and all the freeways and the roads would be quiet. That would be ideal. That would have been a sign that everybody accepted what is patently obvious and we're doing something responsible. And instead we're walking and cycling. And then Of course, it's important to identify those who are most vulnerable and who therefore need the most help, particularly the innocent. And that worldwide, that includes people in developing countries, you know, who are not producing much CO2 at all, but they're the ones at present. Like we could look at India. We could look at the appalling heat wave in India. And India is not producing a lot of CO2. In total it is, but per person, not nearly as much as we are. And then finally, acting with wisdom, wise hope, and unlimited compassion, how best we can do that. Now, the Buddhism in general has been immersed in the interdependence and been aware of the climate really from the very beginning of Buddhism. And in the modern world, at least from the first appearance of, well, the Anthropocene was detected retrospectively a little in the 1950s. That's when the beginning of this Anthropocene, and there's evidence that that Buddhist groups were aware of that, were monitoring that, were very concerned by that. And of course, in the suttas, there are many instances where the life beyond the human is regarded as sacred as the human. We see that in the Ahina Sutta, or by a snake, where all breathing things, all beings, each and every living thing, we wish it good fortune. In the Metta Sutta, it includes all beings, not only human. We wish them happiness. And then Nagarjuna in the 2nd century said, the essential nature of all bodhisattvas is great compassionate heart, and all living beings are the object of her compassion. So this is very reassuring to know that this has been a strong theme from the very beginning for 2,500 years. And if we look back, as in this review, this is in 1997, already there was a vast amount published by Buddhists, and all the different strands of Buddhism had published vast amounts about ecology and about mountains, trees and rivers and climate change. We're very concerned. More recently, we're well aware of, well, the Dalai Lama has written much, David Lloyd, Joanna Macy, people that we know, and Thich Nhat Hanh, the late Thich Nhat Hanh, and many, many more, especially in recent years. So, and I just wanted to refer back to 2014, and that's 8 years ago. And it's hard to remember. I don't think I was concerned with climate change as I should have been back then. But I do remember these statements by a group of Dharma teachers, several hundred Dharma teachers, 28 authored this document. They had met in 2014 and they produced a document that said, back then, climate change is the most serious issue facing humanity. It was already causing serious harm to economies, ecosystems, and people. And they said, as a starting point, the Dharma states, we must first acknowledge the truth of our suffering. As shocking and painful as it may be, we must recognize that without swift and dramatic reductions in fossil fuel use, the major efforts to increase carbon sequestration or isolation, global temperatures will rise to or beyond 2 degrees. And that was the year before the Paris meeting. And then they go on to say this will cause injury and death for millions of people. Even back then, they were making statements. I, for one, was not as moved as I should have been to action. Millions will experience severe trauma. So those representing us, Buddhist teachers and senior Buddhists around the world, had unitedly produced those directives. And they said the following Dharma principles directly apply to the issue of climate disruption. Reverence for life. Happiness stems from helping others. We suffer when we cling. The ethical imperative. All beings matter. Interconnection and interdependence and interbeing, we could add. And then the important one, renunciation and simplicity, living more simply. And I'll mention how important that is. And it's really not mentioned by anybody of note when we're talking about action against climate change, certainly not in elections. Even if we're talking about emission reduction by some period in the future, like 2050. The relationship between the first and second noble truths, the capacity to learn to work with difficult states, opening to suffering as a vehicle for awakening, although we'd rather not have the suffering in the first place, and certainly not suffering in others, the interconnectedness of inner and outer, the individual and the collective, connection to diversity, particularly diversity in the wild, in life, issues of justice amongst humans and also non-humans. Buddhism is a social change agent, adhitthana or determination, so being courageous and heroic in doing what we have to do. And that requires additional courage now because time has passed. This was 8 years ago. This precious human birth is an opportunity. Love is the greatest motivator. Now it's one of the love and compassion and wisdom and so forth. These are the qualities that remain with us. And the Sangha, of course, providing support. And importantly, the Bodhisattva or some figure of great compassion. And one thing I may say later is this should be and is an aspiration for more and more people. And there's certainly more and more publications, talks by monastics about the reality of approaching the Bodhisattva status. But it does require more and more people in the process of simplifying life, and therefore consuming less and less, and therefore emitting less and less, that we are then following the pathway of renunciation, which is an important precondition for a state of bodhisattvahood. So this is further document from that period, that meeting in 2014. What followers of the Dharma can do in body, speech, and mind. Now, this is where I may have to challenge these statements because things have changed in 8 years. We can hold a vision of a world that is not moving towards destruction, a world that is sustainable, a world that is powered by clean energy, no longer burning fossil fuels, a world where poverty is eradicated, population growth is stabilized, and natural systems, the atmosphere, the oceans, forests, soil are restored. We can speak about our love for the natural world, children, animals, and how solving the problem of climate change is essential for their future. So that was probably a reasonable position to take back then. But one of the difficulties of Buddhism is that we have to see the truth as it is. In other words, we have to pierce the delusion where we would prefer the world to be different. And so holding a vision of the world that is not moving towards destruction is no longer, in my view, and others may challenge this, it is no longer realistic. And the longer we hold the view that a sustainable world is possible, the longer it will take us to respond to the world that is. And this is a profoundly difficult matter. More and more people are writing about it, and you're probably aware of books that are available, popular books. Well, they're not so popular, but they're non-academic and they're accessible to people. There was one a year or two ago called the Ministry for the Future, which was a powerful book covering all this. And there's been a lot in the Buddhist literature, also focusing on these topics, but it's not something that's presented week after week in individual sanghas. And it's not really motivating us enough, in my view. And it's very hard to know what to do. And that's one reason to present the talk, because when one reads into the literature, there's a point where really no one knows what to do next at this point. Now, the Club of Rome, I remember reading one of their publications. They've been publishing every year for 50 years. This is the 50th year. So they've got at least 50 publications on the environment, and it began with the limits to growth. In 1972, there was evidence that there were problems with human population, problems with the sustainability of agriculture, the fish stock, just the supplies that we need as one species in the world. And there was also detected rises in CO2 and temperature. And so they started writing Mankind at the Turning Point, The Future of the Oceans. That was in 1986. And then last year they wrote a follow-up, The Empty Sea. So they felt back then in 86 there was a future for the ocean. Now no longer do they feel that. The ocean is empty. And so forth. So these other books, even in 2019, Planetary Emergency Plan, which was hardly read and certainly not adopted. And then in the last year, Limits and Beyond, and then just a few weeks ago, From Inequality to Sustainability. Unfortunately, they seem to have changed their attitude, in my view. Initially, they were very outspoken about what needs to be done. In these two volumes, they are maintaining the delusion. This is the chapters in this book really don't reveal the world the way it is. They feel that we can turn around and become sustainable. Unfortunately, and it's understandable, and many scientists and many people who have the data at hand just find it very, very difficult to present the data that they know to the world. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Don't Look Up, which was well, that's the sort of psychology. It's in my view, it's a good movie. So I recommend seeing it because it really demonstrates in a very clever way this problem. We're not looking up because that's our future, and it's in the case of that meteor, it was going to arrive at a certain time. And there's another movie that's less available, and it's called Once You Know, and it's by people who've been on the front lines of the climate change movement, and they've traveled the world and they've seen the tipping points, and they now know more than they wish they did know. So this is a bit dramatic, but this is our circumstance, and you can imagine people having down here in the city just meeting for coffee and just enjoying the sunshine and wondering what that rumble is. Yeah, there's a bit of data that's I think it's presented in a reasonable way. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology, way back in 1972, that's the year that I mentioned, that's when the Club of Rome began. They mentioned then that there was evidence that unless we changed significantly, there would be social collapse during this century, the 21st century. And so new research that they funded that was published in 2020 demonstrated that if we continue the current business as usual, then there will be societal collapse around the year 2040. So they've done a lot of research in all the different systems, and they feel that this is the case. They looked at 10 variables. They looked at the population, fertility rates, mortality rates, industrial output, food. This was before, well, the work was done before the pandemic. And they were looking at resources, pollution, human welfare, and importantly, that I'll mention in a minute, the ecological footprint. And previously, they mentioned that when we were planning a solution, there was consensus that it would involve universal, equitable social justice, because the solution to the world's problems has to involve justice, even to the poverty-stricken in Africa and Asia, where people really have nothing. They live in the desert, and we've ignored them. So the solution has to include them. And there was the thought that comprehensive technology would be developed. Well, it hasn't arrived, and unfortunately, it's not going to be possible, because to power the technology required to extract CO2 from the air would require like half the energy that we're using at the moment. Anyway, now I was mentioning there in that previous, yes, ecological footprint. And I mentioned previously the importance of what really changing our lifestyle. It's some people call it degrowth, but it's not a very popular topic because it means people changing their lifestyles so they're not consuming so much. And we'll sort of demonstrate that. So this is from Professor William Rees, who has a footprint, if you like, on YouTube. He's a retired professor, but he's saying climate change in itself is not the main problem. It is a symptom of ecological overshoot. We're consuming more than the earth can sustain. That's the problem. And carbon dioxide is one of the pollutants. And so other symptoms are that we're acidifying the oceans, we're polluting and toxifying fresh water, overfishing, degrading landscapes, you know, the whole lot that we're very familiar with. And so we can't correct climate change unless we change this whole problem of overshoot. And he talks about the ecological footprint. And the ecological footprint means that basically in the world, if we look at the land and also the ocean where the fish are, we can determine how much humans as one species can extract from the world to sustain itself and still allow the earth to recover. So the fish recover, the forest recover, the CO2 level stays the same. Everything is as it had been until about a century ago. And you can work out how much land there is, and you can also work out what is that, how much land is it per person in the world, where it means everybody, if you look at, is spread evenly around the world, how much land do they have? And this is an example. So if we see here, this is the each footprint in hectares. That's an understandable measurement. And we can see the United States and Australia up this end. So in the US, to maintain their lifestyle, it's 9.5 hectares, Australia about 8. And then we go all the way down. If we go down to Malawi, they're getting by on less than half of 1 hectare. Now, the average for the earth at the moment is this yellow line. That's how much we're consuming. And this line here is the amount that the earth can sustain. So we're basically extracting almost twice as much. And that's why we're in the predicament we are. We're extracting twice as much as the earth can sustain. And so to correct this problem of overshoot, the people up here, very much including us, we've got to get our consumption down here. I mean, we've got to get this yellow line down to the red and even further to allow the earth to recover. So somehow we've got to get our consumption down from here down to probably a quarter or less. And that's radical. And the people around in these countries, including us, we have a sense of expectation that we can hop into our SUV and drive somewhere or fly, and we can eat whatever we want and we can consume stuff. Now, in Australia, of course, because we're a fairly barren country, our footprint includes other countries, because if we import a car or if we import other items or foodstuffs or jewelry, precious metals, then we're taking that from another part of the world. And so we're not protected. That just adds to our total. So that essentially is the task at hand. But people really, I find, in this part of the world, tend to be entitled and arrogant, and they're not going to change their way, no matter what. And it seems there have been studies, and it seems self-evident that people will not change, even knowing that their children and grandchildren are going to have miserable lives. And so overshoot. So there it is, a footprint on the earth. So basically, the overshoot is about 73%. So we're getting by on, at the moment, 1.73 planets. It's just that we don't have that 0.3 planet. And so that's the problem we have. Now, just a couple of graphs just to show, I guess, more grim news. I mean, this is fossil fuel consumption, and back to 1850, and of course it goes up and up and up, and you can see it's going up. We're supposed to, that's 2015, we're supposed to be going down, and we're going up. And this is fuel consumption. So that's a bit like the footprint. There's the US, and there's Australia right up here, huge amounts. And if you look at it per capita, it's huge compared with India's down here. Now this is Australia. Now this is the CO2, and we don't sort of know this number. It's about 600. This is back in 1990, and then it went down and up. So 2005 was a bit above 600, and then it has come down following a cycle that we saw over here. And I think that's why the government feels that it's doing very well. This doesn't relate to any particular policy, but we're up here now, and I hope you can see this edge of the graph. If we want to get down to by 50% of 2005 by 2030, we've got to be following this line, and ideally we'd be following this line. That would get us down to 75% by 2030. I think that's what the Greens want, whereas this is the way we're going. So that's the gap. So if you look at the policy, I think the Labor Party is happy with 43%, I think, 43, yeah, by 2030. The government, I think, 28. Some of the independents, I think down to 60, and I think the Greens 75. The Greens want 75 so that it's zero by 2035. I mean, that is about what scientifically is required. But it won't happen. It won't happen unless we cut back our consumption, because otherwise we're just trying to find sustainable energy to enable us to maintain our current lifestyle. And our lifestyle has to be diminished. Back to where it was back in the 50s. Those of us who remember the 50s remember that life was pretty simple and pretty pleasant. I mean, a lot of people didn't have cars, didn't fly very often. And when I've spoken to people about this, many people simply say, look, if we had to do that, I'd rather die. They said it would be impossible to go back. Now, this is a graph showing that number. So this is the CO2 emissions for the whole world. And this is in billions of tons. And that's where it was in 2018, 36.1, 36.1. And then the pandemic, many of us were hoping that graph there would continue down, but it's bounced back and overshot. So that's where it is as of about 6 weeks ago. And this is a familiar temperature chart, which is the consequence of the overshoot. So it's been like that back to the year 0, and then suddenly it's going up, called the hockey stick chart, and it's up to, well, in actual fact, it's interesting how people are reporting the temperature of the Earth, because it's in the report that the United Nations produced a few weeks ago, Australia was actually 1.4, New Zealand was 1.1, so it's not uniform. And there's a lot of what people call heat in the system, because all the CO2 that has been produced is still in the air because it lasts for hundreds of years, maybe even 1,000. So it's up there. So even if we do nothing, supposing we produce not another molecule, the temperature will continue to rise. So the United Nations has been misleading in saying that there's still a chance to keep it under 1.5, because scientists who know this and who know about the tipping points, know about methane, know that it's not even going to stay under 2. And so And of course, extreme weather, which is a consequence of all of the above. We've seen the extreme the wildfires in the Western US at the moment. They've started like 2 months before the normal fire season. And there's an interesting phenomenon that in the US and other places, after a wildfire, there's extreme rainfall follows. And so when the last wildfires in the US were controlled or burnt out, there were floods, and there was just nothing living on the surface. So there were mudslides, and more people died in the mud than died in the fire. And of course, rising sea levels. It's already displacing tens of thousands in Bangladesh, in parts of Africa. There's the current heat wave. And it's interesting there that, like the pandemic, where it was officially declared that in India, 600,000 died of the pandemic, but other figures, other evidence suggests it was 4 times that, it was 2 million. And the same with this heat wave. It's reported that a few hundred people have died, but it's more likely to be 10,000. Because there was a similar heat wave, you may remember, in France in 2003. And in France, which is a much smaller country, it's a developed country, but 15,000 people died in France. So I think we'll never know the total in India, but it will be tens and maybe even hundreds of thousands who die. And there are many other heat crises around the world that are not reported in third world countries. There are already 20 to 40 million people who are climate refugees. This is, of course, our own experience with floods, rain systems that we're experiencing now in Australia. And then finally, I may mention the different tipping points. For example, the ice in the Arctic, which is going to be fully melted during summer very soon. So this, I hope you can see all of this. We've got a bunch of people coming along, answers at this junction. Simple but wrong. Everybody heads that way. In other words, they're heading that way, basically business as usual, if they're leaving the solution up to their governments. And as in life, simple solutions are quite often wrong or inadequate. But to go to the right complex, but the right direction. But very few are going up this difficult climb. So what Professor William Rees reports, and this is really the Buddhist view as well, to eliminate overshoot, which is overshoot is overconsumption. So that's grasping, isn't it? That's grasping and attachment. We want more stuff. So, and the Buddha, there are several suttas that you're probably familiar with that indicated that if we did not respond to grasping, attachment, aversion, and delusion, that's the state we're in, that this can be fatal. It's very important to address these matters. I mean, not only does it cause dukkha, but it can lead to mortality. And I'm reminded of the Sutta of the Seven Sons. I don't know if you know that one, but it's really when all human beings behave less and less morally. In other words, they're not following any of the tenets of the Dharma. And he implied this could well happen in a cyclical way. From time to time that happens. And in response to that, a second sun arises in the sky. And then since there's no change in behavior, a third, a fourth. And he describes in great detail how everything becomes parched. There are fires, things melt, people die. And then after about the third sun, a small group of people discover the Dharma, a very small number, and they ultimately survive, but no one else does. So really the formal recognition of the end of material growth. I mean, it's not returning growth to zero or the circular economy. We actually have to reduce it. You know, in the West, we've got to reduce it down to about a quarter. And then everything else follows. And then there are many difficulties associated with this transition. Many people trying to determine how to begin this process. It's very hard to imagine any government going to an election recommending that we all reduce consumption by 75%. And then all sorts of then consequences. We have to support families and communities, and this has to be a global effort. We've got to retrain the workforce. People have to work, but perhaps they work fewer hours, and so forth. I just wanted to remind everybody of the Tibetan Plateau, where in northern India, where Buddhism began and still flourishes. And of course, it's the most intensively sourced area of rivers. And these rivers provide water to about half the population. But unfortunately, like everywhere else up in the Qinghai Tibet Plateau, the glaciers are melting. There are 46,000 glaciers, and these are being monitored by satellite. And then there are glaciers, obviously, in the Alps and all the other mountain ranges, the Andes, and the same problem is happening virtually everywhere. And so the temperature in that area is rising 4 times faster than the world as a whole. It's a bit like the Arctic. And so there's reduced snow, reduced permafrost, glacial retreat by 30%. And so the flow in these rivers is already down to half. And it's hard to know what plans are going to be successful to provide these huge populations. And it's already leading to migration. As this picture indicates, this was back in 2019. This is obviously a bit more, and now we find there are more climate refugees. And this graph just indicates the number of climate-related disasters per year. So it went from 2012, 183 up to 1,500. So it is grim, and this there are quite a number of you could call them academic think tanks. So these are funded departments in universities that are focused on this one called the Global Challenges Foundations, but there is another one at Oxford, which is the Department of Study of Existential Crises. But this one produced a report in 2017, and a bit like the previous report that I mentioned, that indicated that the human civilization was coming towards an end, and that the world is completely unprepared. And really, what more can they do but provide evidence of this? Now, I don't know does anybody know Noam Chomsky? He's a man, he should be a household word. This is a picture of him, and he's 93 years of age. And he's an American. I first heard of him 51 years ago. He was a younger man like I was, and he was brilliant. He was trained and worked predominantly as a linguist. So he was a man who was very interested in language and meaning. And I think that allowed him, because he moved into the area of human rights. And I remember seeing pictures of him all those years ago in an office with books and papers and people coming and going, and he was keeping on top of all the human rights issues. And he was the most humble man, warm-hearted, and he's the most credible man, in my view, on the planet. When he says something, it means it's something that he has considered until he reached a conclusion. That conclusion may be certainty, but he's got the wisdom of a bodhisattva, so he knows when he doesn't know. And he is just so credible and warm. And he's, because of Zoom, he's at home and he's wearing his pajamas here. I mean, given the news that he's presenting, I guess he's not motivated to put on anything else. But he's only got so much energy, and he said he's got books to write, and being at home, he's on Zoom most days, and he's so generous with his time. He's so open and listens to people to make sure that he hears them right. And so here, this is at the end of a short talk, and he says, the challenge is unique in human history. It will be met now, for we are doomed, not to die all at once, but doomed to a world in which those who die will be the lucky ones. When he says that, it's powerful. So he said that just last month. He said other things, but he was particularly grim. And he's really concerned for the world. I mean, he knows that he will die soon, but he's concerned for the world that he leaves. And he was talking about the Doomsday Clock, which many of you will know. This was set up by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists after the Second World War, when they realized that there was a proliferation of atomic weapons and initially fission and then later fusion bombs. And so when they set it up, they worked out the clock, and there was a lot of methodology, and they set it at 7 minutes to midnight, in view of the fact that there were nuclear bombs proliferating at that moment. And then by the time it got to 1953, when the first hydrogen bomb was exploded by the US and then by Russia, it went to 2 minutes. And then at the end of the Cold War, it went out to 17 minutes. And so in January of this year, it went to 100 seconds. They've turned it now from minutes to seconds. That's now 100 seconds to midnight. This is adding up all the risks, which include those from Ukraine and the risk of nuclear weaponry, but mostly climate change. And so they've set it to 100 seconds. And so now, and they're also reviewing it now every 2 or 3 months instead of twice a year. And there's a lot of study, as I mentioned, in the human future. So this is from an academic group in the US, published recently. So this is, we can go along here, and then if we don't get it right, we follow a catastrophic trajectory. Otherwise, we keep this status quo. And then if we have some technological advances or move to another planet, we might go up in this direction. And then a paper recently was just looking at, well, how is climate change going to cause any threat to social order? And so this was a review of 250 studies. And basically, climate change and other extreme events require a lot of complexity in society to fight them. So the complexity of, say, fighting forest fires with planes and highly sophisticated fire trucks, moving people, sustaining them with funding and so forth. And that's not available in all countries. And so new engineering, social institutions. So it's and then we become concerned with it, and it becomes the focus. And so many people are now depressed, and so they need the support from psychology and modern medicine to sustain them and so forth. Some people will move away. And so fundamentally, they said that, the authors said that there will be climactic drivers that lead to armed and civil disruption. So people, for a variety of reasons, will engage in uncivil behavior. There will be epidemics. We've seen the pandemic, we've seen other viruses moving down through Australia, dengue fevers moving south. There are likely to be other pandemics. And then migration. And so migration, of course, may lead to armed conflict. Because when you look at Australia, and you've got millions, even 1 billion people not far to our northwest, when one thinks about it, if they come by boat, it won't be by a rickety timber boat that may sink. They'll be coming here by naval vessels and container ships. And so this sort of indicates a graph. This is complexity. So you can imagine us moving along here in a simple state, and then that was the 1950s. And then for various reasons, life gets more complex because of climate and other factors, population and political factors, lots of things. And so eventually we settle down here, and for a period of time we're on a plateau, and the complexity is under control. But then things take us up further. This is sort of the situation where the world is in. And this up here is resilience. So as we're moving up, it's costing us basically capital and complexity and money and time just to stay in the one place. And then you reach a point where up here, that's a point of balance, and it's not possible. Resilience sort of fails at that point for one reason or another, and so then we go down this other side. And this is only one theory, but it's something that we need to be considering. And beyond all of this, all these theories, which are being well funded and some people are taking it seriously, we need to communicate this to the population to let people know what's going on. And just, I'm going to finish in a minute with a couple of slides. So this is a very interesting paper looking at the different scenarios that are end of the world, human extinction, global catastrophic risk, and so on. And the question is, whose world exactly is expected to end? And then we forget that we're really always talking about the white world. And I'm caught up by this all the time, being white. First, the present apocalyptic narratives embed a series of problematic assumptions motivated not by a general concern for the world, but rather with the task of securing white futures. And the white future is relevant because many analysts, particularly those who are not white, are reporting that our crisis is the end result of the colonial process, where white people went and colonized the world, created havoc, exploited, extracted, and in the process began technology, the recent phase, accelerated by slavery in many places. But the end result was discharging waste into the atmosphere, into the oceans and rivers. And they would say that we still have, that is the whites, who populate the rich countries for the most part and who are responsible. They still have a colonial attitude in discharging waste into the atmosphere. So they've colonized the atmosphere. And they think it's a thought, I own this, I can put whatever I want into it. Much the same as the oceans. And with a complete disregard for any other form of humanity as well as the rest of the planet. And they say, they highlight how visions drawn from Black, Indigenous and people of color, their future views reimagine a more just and vibrant life. So they see, well, because they can, I mean, Indigenous people already have cut back. They're no longer producing much CO2. So their lifestyle, people that are still living in an Indigenous way, is perfect. All they want, what they want is just for white people to go away and give them their land back. And then they can just continue as they are for the next millennium or three. And really the same with these other groups, with people of color and Indigenous and Black people in other countries. They're so often not in a position to produce much CO2. They don't consume enough. So I'm just going to move on just to say that in response to this, many people have found that communication is an important step, and that people don't get alarmed. They'd much rather know the truth. That's point one. And let me just see. I won't deal with that. Yes. So there is a movement of enhancing compassion. So there are many people, courses, institutions, training people in compassion. So as I see it, Buddhist Compassion, and this is by Geshe Thupten Jinpa, who you probably know. He's a Tibetan Buddhist and close friend of the Dalai Lama. So he's developing courses in compassion, and these could be widespread and throughout all the schools. So there's compassion, because before we have compassion, it's less likely people will cut back. And of course, everybody is stressed and we need compassion. And these are examples of people that are combining psychoanalysis with Buddhist practice. This is another way. There are now more and more guidances to become a bodhisattva that you can see online or read and so forth. So these are all very positive, Buddhist-based responses to the terrible situation we find ourselves in. So I will leave my presentation on that positive note, and then feel free to ask any questions. or make comments. So I will stop share. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was a very, very informative talk. Thank you.
So anyone would like to ask any questions, just
Well, if
feel
anybody
free.
wants, I mean,
Yeah.
I can send the slides to anybody who wants them. I mean, I guess if you just let who would be the best person? Meredith, I guess, would it? Anyway, as long as someone lets me know, have an email, I'll send them the slides. There are more slides, but they're all pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, you can send to me, and then if anyone interested, I can just forward to them. Yeah.
Okay. Have I got your email?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Okay. I will do that.
Yeah. Does anyone has any questions to raise? You know, I was just wondering. One of the slides you showed that the CO2 emission, you say during the pandemic, it actually went up rather than going down.
No, it went down.
Is it 36.3?
No, it went down and then it's come up since.
Oh.
But you see that figure was for last year, the last calendar year. So it probably would have been worse because there was still some lockdown in different parts of the world.
Mm.
So that's disconcerting. I mean, I guess some of the things to consider is, I mean, why are we not doing more? You know, because it's hard to find any example. I know I've heard of small municipalities, like small groups of maybe 50,000 people in different parts of the world, in the developed world, where they have taken action to reduce emissions and they've succeeded to a large degree. So this would be like a council, the Australian equivalent of a municipality in other. I think there are one or two in Australia, where at least anyone working for the council, for the municipality, they do not drive. I mean, there are cars if required, but otherwise people have to get to work by public transport, walk or cycle. And during the day, if they have to go places, well then, and they're encouraged to go because, you know, if they can walk or cycle, they're getting exercise rather than just communicating via Zoom. And I guess individuals, I think there are many individual people, and I expect a lot of green voters and people that are aligned are probably vegetarian. They probably don't have cars and so forth.
Jonathan, I had a question for you about I don't know whether you work with young people who've lost hope, given an understanding, so more teenagers. So I've got a friend with a teenage son who's really aware of all of this and has really lost hope. How do you keep in your mind the reality and not go into denial, but maintain hope? And how do you counsel or help somebody like that?
Well, that's a wonderful question, because I did have a slide on children, and it's been known, and there was a study late last year in Australia, but it was only a small sample of 600 kids, but 45% of them were either very or substantially depressed and distressed with climate issues. But there was another study, an international, on 10,000 children between, and young adults, 14 to 24, and I think 60% were very distressed. The majority of it admitted they were very distressed, and it was broken down into all different aspects of their life. It included like grief, anticipatory grief or actual grief, because they can see that the quality of their life has already diminished. They've lost part of their life. So Greta, that's what Greta, what's her last name? Greta
Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, Thunberg, Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
She said, "You've stolen my childhood," to the United Nations. And she was exactly right. We've stolen the kids. And you're right, they are distressed and it's not being managed well. there's lots of like publications from educational authorities or academics about how to introduce the topic and how to help kids, but it's just not happening because, and in fact, yes, in fact, I saw a publication. It was a fairly radical. It was educating high school kids, you know, in the 2020s. What should we be doing? Radically changing the curriculum, because they have to focus on the present, because the only way to deal with their emotions is to let them see the cause, the problem, you know, and they can't rely on their parents to do so. Teachers have to be trained specifically. And he said that it's reached the point, particularly with all this evidence about societal collapse, that any topic at school has to be a topic that is presented with love. So kids must experience love and compassion in every topic, you know, in an age-appropriate way, and their teachers have to be skillful in doing that. I mean, why doesn't it happen anyway? You think, well, why aren't kids educated, you know, in a setting that has love and compassion as the default background atmosphere? And then there's a good chance they will continue that on into their life. And so that's what he was saying. And it was on the basis of some trials that he had conducted. I think he was from Sweden. But children, they need to be involved, and I'm not the only one saying this, they need to be treated seriously, and young kids need to be part of the democratic process. You know, they need adults to look at them in the face, like come down to their height and shut up and listen. And say, right, please tell us, what have we done? Please tell us how you see the way that we have ruined your world. That sort of thing, whatever is appropriate. And let them speak out. And what can we do? And what can we stop doing to make your world a happier place? And
sorry, I was just going to say, and I think it even starts much earlier. I think that recently I was offered to teach 5 hours a week, 0 to 5-year-olds, yoga and drama. And I think one of the things that won me over with the director was when she was asking me why, I spoke about things like, you know, compassion and nurture and being able to help the children identify their emotions, etc., 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 because a lot of that stuff is not learned and is not known, and it has to start very, very young so that they've got that blueprint to carry through together and to identify.
I totally agree. I think we're back to 5, and I've seen classes of kids aged 4 and 5 sitting cross-legged, meditating, you know, for like minutes. You're doing that? And
yeah, I'm starting next week in my local area in Lilyfield. I'm very excited.
Universal. Yeah, it should be universal, and
absolutely.
Body work, identifying emotions, naming them, describing them, and what triggers them, and everything about emotions, friendship, love, and treated like well, like how shall I say, as complete human beings.
Yeah. You
know, I mean, we have to listen to them and let them rise to the occasion and tell us. And now we're spending a lot of time listening to kids. We're not doing any damaging things to the planet, because ultimately, different people have indicated that we should be aiming for communities of like 10,000 people without cars or planes. They live within cycling and walking distance. The communities may be separate completely. If they're too far apart, you can move to the nearby ones. But people spend a lot of time with each other because there's no cars. I mean, the quality of the time is much higher because there aren't a lot of the distracting activities that we have now. I mean, a lot of things can be done, but a lot of time. And so a lot of it is listening time and meditation time and creative time. There'll be vegetables to grow. I mean, there'll be a communal garden, food supply, providing other items, clothing and so forth. So it's returning to a type of life of maybe a century ago. And I think children love that sort of life because they can run around in safety. They're not going to be knocked over by cars. I mean, kids love to cycle. There'll be cycle paths. You can imagine what it would be like. I think we just have to begin that process by listening to kids and in some way, I mean, the generations that have caused the damage have to seek forgiveness from the younger kids, but also ultimately in some symbolic way from other life forms and the earth itself. And I think part of the process would be having ceremonies where that is done.
And Faye, you have something to share about Climate Council? Faye?
What was that?
Faye.
Hello.
Hello, Faye.
Hi. The Climate Council has a great program, and they've had it for quite a number of years now, where they call it the city's partnership. And they partner with councils who want to be a part of it. And they also have, I think there's over 100, and then they help the councils to share their resources and their thinking and innovation and prizes. And Yakanandra is one of the ones that comes to mind, but Newcastle Council's done some interesting things because of part of this and moving and getting people thinking differently. But Yakanandra is interesting, and they've also the home of Indy, federally Indy, and the Kathy McGowan and Miss Haynes, who was a doctor. And one of the things that group of forward-thinking women have done is they're nurturing the young people now who want to do something about climate action or influencing politics, and running workshops for them, but not just workshop, working with them step by step. If you want to put in a submission, you have a go, come and talk about it with us, send it off to council to tell them what you want, etc. They're also an area that got the first big battery for their community, where people put in and now getting the benefits. So there's some interesting ones around. And the interesting thing, it's often the rural countries who are the most forward thinking in this area, the ones that we say are most conservative, but there's a whole group that are actually the most forward thinking.
Well,
and that includes in their agriculture.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And
I remember not to put everybody into a same box. And I think some people who maybe are not doing anything, it's because we haven't sold them. They think you're just going to dump them rather than talking about a transition and looking after them. It's only really now that politicians are talking sensibly about jobs. And only one part of the political spectrum that's actually talking sensibly about jobs for the future. And I think if you rely on a particular industry, and you can, even if you can see the writing on the wall, you're not going to vote yourself into oblivion without some other promise or hope.
Well, yes, hope, and I think we've been talking about that. I was going to talk about wise hope, which Joan Halifax talks about, which we need to sustain us. We need hope, but it's just making sure we don't confuse hope with optimism. I mean, wise hope is complete realism. You know, you notice you have preferences for the future, but you also know that you've always had these. But in the end, you accept the reality of what actually happened. That's what we do every day. But thanks for talking about the Climate Council. Yes, I do know that program, and I'm glad to have that update. And I do know that some farmers, because the farmers are the most vulnerable, amongst the most vulnerable in our community.
Absolutely.
With their produce, their dependence on water supply, and great distances they have to travel, necessarily in a vehicle of some sort, and they don't feel they're being listened to by the city, and they're providing the food to the city, and they're providing the country with so much wealth.
Yep, and people are criticising what they produce, and also the services aren't there. We just went for a trip into the country recently, and one person was telling us he wanted to become an Australian citizen, and the local service, New South Wales service provider, said, no, we can't do it here. You've got to go to the town, which was 140 kilometres away. So in other words, $80 odd worth of petrol plus his whole day. And he got there and the person just said, all right, can I see your paperwork? And stamped it and handed it back to him, all of 2 minutes or less, and said, that's it. He said he could have done that online.
Absolutely.
So why wasn't he given that opportunity was his question.
Well, we know that in the country too, the hospitals are becoming depleted of doctors and experienced nursing staff. So that's, well, whatever it is, this is, so the rural people amongst the vulnerable category that I mentioned, that the solution has to be equitable.
Yep. And
one of the first things is to find out how we can reverse the inequity and make sure that all people in our country and other countries are approaching the same point.
I think too, we'd have to get away from this idea that a tax cut's good for us, because we see tax cut and we think, oh, that's good, until you delve into what you're giving up to get as a country.
Yeah.
And who actually benefits from the tax cut.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's actually, I've just realized it's 9:04. We've done a little bit over time for everyone. It was such an interesting talk and such a great discussion afterwards. But I think we need to end now. We've got Jonathan back, fortunately, next week on the 4 pillars of well-being. So that's really fantastic.
Well, it'll be a lighter topic, but obviously the two are related. But I'll be sticking to the more dharmic aspects of well-being.
Yes.
I look forward to coming back.
We'll be prepared. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you. See you next week.
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.